Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Benjamin Rivers, a game developer working with his wife under the studio name BancyCo that has made such titles as Home, Alone with You, and Worse Than Death. Hi, Benjamin. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Oh no, thank you so much for agreeing to join me. It's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. I love talking about games and I talk a lot. So get ready.
No, I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, I'm ready. So Benjamin, before we get started though, if you don't mind, would you just mind, telling us a little bit about yourself and the studio, just for those that might not be aware?
Yeah, so we just celebrated, this is 2021 when we're recording this, and we just celebrated our ninth year officially as a studio. And we started off just being called Benjamin Rivers Inc. Because I was freelancing at the time. And when I incorporated, I didn't know that I was going to be making games. So we just sort of rolled into it. But as we hit our ninth year, we realized we wanted to rebrand, which is why we are now called BancyCo. So I've been here making games in Toronto for over 9 years, and I've been working in design and other things for God a long time before that. So yeah, I feel like I'm a lifer at this point, pretty deep into it.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you've been doing it for as long as you have and such, and in Toronto especially, which has such a from what I've heard and spoken with other people, it does have such a nice indie scene to it. Um, so yeah, so I imagine a lifer is very much a fair thing to refer to it as, if you will.
Yeah, it's pretty great here. There are so many talented developers in this city. Sometimes I still find out about companies that I don't know or not super familiar with, and I wait and oftentimes I'll see it on like a showcase for another for like Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo or something, and then go, wait a minute, hold on, I didn't know those guys were here too. And there's some developers that we work with now, and they sort of work with other developers, and there's games launching all over the place, and I realize, oh, it feels like this. It feels like the development industry gets larger, but it also gets smaller at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, or I hope maybe after this whole pandemic thing is done and over with, and I say that in air quotes because who
Right.
knows anymore.
Right.
Um, but I imagine once that's over and you guys are able to start doing the little get-togethers or whatnot, as I understand, do exist and happen. I might be wrong, and if I am, oops. But I imagine getting to see all the other people that are starting to come out and pop off just makes the idea of maybe those get-togethers or what have you all the more exciting when you get to actually see the success of other people in. Uh, Now, Toronto's not small, but I'm going to say a relatively small ecosystem, all things considered, if I may.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing about Canada, of course, is that we don't have a lot of large cities. It's not like the U.S. Our population is very small, all things considered. So when people tend to congregate, they do so in one of our few major cities. So communities just naturally seem to pop up because people are less spread out than they might be in a country that has like more larger cities.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And just a quick note on that one, because I love sharing this really pointless fact about Canada for no reason other than because I'm weird. But one of the things I love about Toronto is the population of arguably, unarguably, our largest city is bigger, it has a higher population than I think most, like most, almost all of our provinces.
Right.
Um, so sorry, I know unnecessary sidetrack. I just one thing I love sharing because it's hilarious to me.
Yeah, lots of small towns. I'm from small towns as well, so it's a lot of rural areas.
Yes, definitely, definitely. So, Benjamin, I just want to get right into it with you because you love talking about games. I love talking about games, and I want to get to that for us. So, what is it that got you into developing and making games? And based on your experiences, is there something that you'd be able to, or advice that you'd be able to share with those looking to also get into the industry?
Yeah, so I can answer your first question in two parts. So the
Sure.
first thing is essentially as a kid, I was always I grew up in the or I was born in the late '70s, so I grew up in the '80s essentially as a kid and was a teen in the '90s. So as a kid, I was into games and playing things like in television and then eventually in NES and whatnot. But it was sort of that earlier generation that was my introduction, as well as sort of like some computer games here and there. So a lot of it was just the novelty of just technologically based games because it was such a new thing back then. And I used to design games even when I was a kid, though I didn't realize I was doing it at the time. So the family and television was my first console, and what I would do is create these instruction manuals and sort of like almost like faux video game magazine write ups, even though I didn't have access to game magazines at the time for games that I was creating. And the one I always remember was this like junkyard brawler for the Intellivision. And I have this very vivid memory of designing like the sort of pixel art fence, which is why there's a pixel art fence in home. But all this, these sort of like Intellivision levels of detail for the background and how the character would work and how you animate, and then creating the manual, um, coloring it in with crayons or colored pencil or whatnot, and designing games on paper that way. So apparently I was into it and I didn't realize it. And then what happened was I got to go to this extra class when I was in grade school for I guess just like overachieving kids just to keep them from annoying everyone. That's what I like to assume. And one of the things we did in that class was design a board game. And I worked with this guy named Tom, this other kid who's a way better artist than I was, and we had so much fun designing this board game, and it was essentially the first time I got to practice game design. What does it mean to design a paper board game, going around a board, how do pieces move, what are the rules, risk reward, all that kind of stuff. And again, it's something I didn't realize till much later I'd already sort of done through this class, but that sort of gave me the bug. And the first time I got to put my game design skills really into practice was creating levels in like Wolfenstein and Doom and things like that in the '90s once I was able to get a PC. And then in Toronto, about 2007 is when the kind of indie game boom started to happen. A lot of that because of things being made on console and PC and storefronts sort of opening up, and as well as the iPhone eventually happened, and that started to open up once the App Store launched in 2008. But also, that was when development tools became a bit more democratized and available. So you had Stencil and Sketch and a bunch of other things, and eventually for me it was Game Maker, the earlier versions of Game Maker. So I got to sort of jump into making games as someone who didn't do anything like that technically up until that point, as well as a bunch of other people did. There's sort of the people came before us like Jess Mack and MetaNet and other people, and people like Super Brothers, who was sort of in my quote unquote class, of budding game designers. So that whole mix of accessibility to software and community and a place to actually put your game, such as online, meant that a whole bunch more people were trying it, including me. And that's kind of what kicked off me making stuff, then eventually making Home, which became our first published game, and on it went from there.
Awesome. And that's definitely a good thing to note that, that really was the time of the boom. As you said, all the software started coming out. It was definitely a lot easier to get into as opposed to using the level editor systems for Doom, or other things like that, where uh, things like Hammer or what have you, they did exist. It was, I'm going to say, easy, in quotes, to develop levels, or what have you, but it was easier in comparison to what it used to be, right? And then, Home, for example, came out, just around that big boom when a bunch of other, great indie games were really starting to explode. And yeah, it's great to hear that, you found the ability to uh, make use of the talents and make use of everything that you had wanted to do, and move forward with it. I'm struggling to put that in the right way, but I hope what I'm saying makes sense, and I apologize for the uh, jumble of words there.
No, totally, totally can understand. It was one of those things where you don't quite realize it at the time, but you get a little inkling that something special is happening. And even though it's, for other people, this may not seem like that big of a deal, but for us, it was like being in the middle of like the punk rock revolution, or where suddenly things can happen. Within a matter of months, you realize, oh my God, I'm meeting with people from Valve, and they're like, "Oh, could you please put your game on our store?" Like, just imagine that today for anyone who's listening to this who is a game developer. Imagine talking to Valve and they're like, "Oh yeah, please come to our store. We really like you to be on there." And like meeting humans who run it. Absolutely insane by today's standards, but that was sort of the space that it was in. It was very early days, but it was so great because we just things just sped up so fast. And if you had the time and the inkling and like a computer that could sort of run the software to get stuff done, there was opportunities, and that happened as well with getting on the PlayStation and everything else. It was just sort of right place at the right time, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, and there is something I want to touch on there for those that are unaware, because this was only quote unquote 10 or so years ago now. But um at the beginning, Valve didn't really, or Steam didn't really have an easy way to get on. There was Greenlight. Before that, there was the incredibly secretive system where you had to have a publisher, and even then, that was very convoluted from what I was able to gather over the years. Um, Having them come to you and ask you to come to their platform is incredibly wild, because before that the indie game scene did sort of exist, but it was a lot harder to get through because um and by all means correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of it was having to set up like a PayPal or through other payment processing means years and years and years ago, which were um, somewhat terrifying in today's standard of security.
Right.
And like you just had to hope that someone found you. Like I think it was Space Zombies and Pirates one, for example, was a pre Steam game. Aquarius, I believe, I think that's the right name. Gish, I think, was one of them.
Hmm.
And all of those games, you kind of had to hope that PC Gamer wrote a small blurb on you, and that someone would then navigate to your website and trust whatever payment processor implementation you chose to use, or PayPal or what have you. So, I think you're spot on with, there was, you were kind of there for like the punk rock phase where, Steam was just starting up, coming to you and going to other people, and it was just the small boom was starting. Like, I almost want to say like the calm before the storm, because now it's seemingly open, um, open waters, and it's just come on in, right? But back then, that was something, and being at the beginning of it is something special. If if I'm understanding correctly, or if I have understood a lot of things correctly.
No, no, you're absolutely right. And so Home originally launched pre-Steam. It launched in June 2012, and then June, yeah, that's right, June. I think it was June 1st, 2012, and then launched on Steam in August. So in between there was the visit by Valve, and then we got sort of sorted. And I had to do exactly that. We had lucked out with some press several months before the launch, and just um, we Joystick, which no longer exists, the website Joystick, gave us a really big press push because of an IGF trailer we submitted that October, the previous October in 2011, and essentially during that entire bit from 2011 to launch in June, it was like, oh, I guess I actually have to make this game now, and it's not just a bunch of BS in a trailer because because people are paying attention. And I actually I signed on to a system. I don't even remember the name of it, but it was this very small company somewhere in the states that essentially ran a digital download fulfillment system where it was a way to automate somebody getting access to my set of like Windows files for home, but getting so with a unique download code, so it couldn't just be pirated and passed around willy nilly. It wasn't just like an open download, and one that had a fulfillment email so they could contact me for support, like all that stuff that you take for granted with Steam or anything else. Um, and we had to do the whole thing. I remember speaking to the people. I can't remember what her name was, but there was this one agent that I spoke to, and she was essentially the person who helped me out when I had issues, when there were like download problems or somebody had some technical issue or something else I couldn't figure out. And it was all manual. You know, we shipped all these boxes that we built for the game, the original physical version of the game, shipped them all out by hand from our living room, and dealt with this whole thing essentially manually. You know, installed whatever backend, PHP backend we needed. I can't even remember at this point. And it sounds absolutely insane nowadays, as opposed to saying like, oh yeah, just putting the game up on the eShop or whatever, or up on Steam or on itch.io. But that was sort of the Wild West at the time. But it was great because it taught you how to deal with everything you have to do when you sell games and sort of market games to people, including the back end and customer support and all that. And so I'd like to actually use that as a way to answer the second part of your question, which was about advice. Um, and there's essentially two pieces of advice I could give someone who's maybe thinking about getting into games, listening to this, or is maybe trying to work on something and wants to know what to do. The first is you have to make something super small, and then you have to make like 100 of those super small things. I taught game design classes and other classes for about 13 years at a university. So this is something I told my students a lot. And the way I say it is making games is like running a quest in an RPG. If you don't turn the quest in, you don't get the experience. And what I mean by that is if you don't finish a project, you don't actually learn everything you need to know and get the proper XP to sort of move on and start something new. So if you just start a game or have these like gigantic ambitions for like, oh, I'm going to make this like 100-hour roguelike online multiplayer, whatever, you're probably never going to finish it. And you're not going to learn everything you need to learn to make a game. You need to make a game that takes like 1 minute to play from beginning to end and get to learn that experience. Because that teaches you not just about making a game or design or art or music or anything like that. It teaches you about um, designing interactions with that another human being is going to have. That's like user experience design. So what happens when a game boots up, and what do you see? Is there a title screen? Is there a credit screen? Is there an opening cutscene? Is there something that has to be in there to explain to people what's going on? What does the main gameplay look like? What happens if you win or lose, or however your game is structured? Just how do you exit from that game? Is that got a menu? Is that something where you just have to play it till the end and then you get some sort of outro and then the game ends? All of those things are important in games, and not just the gigantic spreadsheet and pieces of paper with really cool designs on them. So if you are right now listening to this trying to make something, take whatever you have in your head, whatever concept you may be writing down or sketching out, and reduce that to 25% of whatever that idea is. Make just that 25%. And if you can do that, then you can worry about making a game that's a little bit bigger next time. But you got to do that a whole lot.
And I love the way you framed that advice because you gamified it. You gamified the the whole process, and that's a really interesting way to do it. And thank you for that advice because it's something I um hear often, and I'm not trying to say that diminishes what you've said. It's just reinforces what is said and shared. And like I said, I just absolutely love the way you framed it all up. So thank you for that.
Right on.
So I'm gonna go off a little bit of the scripts because when we initially started discussing this, there was some things that you had kind of wanted to talk about, or at least the pitch that you put out to Twitter asking to talk about. So, as someone that has made a comic for Worse Than Death, if I understand correctly, the lead in or the prequel, if you will. Uh,
Sequel. It's
so,
actually a follow up.
oh, awesome. Okay, so sorry that was on me for misunderstanding that. Um, I'm going to assume that you are someone that enjoys comics and such. So, has there been a way, or has there been any comics that have kind of influenced the way that you approach game design or the ideas that you have and how you want to present them?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely, I could talk about comics forever, probably even more than games. Uh, Manga in particular, so Japanese comics in particular, influence everything we do. Both with my wife and I, the way we approach games, we're both. I mean, that's how we met was in college, bonding over comics and manga and whatnot. So we both take a lot of our sort of cultural and design references from things like manga because manga is such a mature medium. more so than North American comics in a way, because there is a richer variety of content in manga than there is in, say, like traditional, American superhero comics. Um, but there's also a lot of variety and really cool other kinds of lessons in like European comics in particular. But with manga, because there is just this huge amount of content in every genre you could possibly imagine, sports, romance, every mixture of all that stuff. If there's something you're looking for in terms of like, say, pacing, tone, even setting, like I doubt you could not find a manga that has something that you think about, and what we found really helpful is, like, I read a ton of manga, especially now because the Toronto Public Library has so much of it that I can just get almost everything I'm looking for. Um, but what I use it for is just look and see how these artists structure their stories about particular kinds of topics. So if something is like a horror manga, which I like to read, there are manga that's very fantasy based, like maybe a bit more quote unquote light in that it's not like overly grotesque or horrific. Other stuff that is meant to be extremely shocking and much more gross. Other stuff is more psychological, etc. And what I find really helpful with that is to help me um, break out of my own assumptions when it comes to design a game, because I often think of when we often think of designing games, you just naturally think of other games in a similar genre or style. I was joking with a friend the other day that horror games are very frustrating to me because most, especially on the indie side, most developers just essentially try to remake the same 2 to 3 games over and over again. They're making like a bad version of Silent Hill or a bad version of Resident Evil, or some sort of pastiche in there, and they ignore all this other stuff in the horror genre that exists, including other games that aren't strictly horror but have really cool elements that can be used as such. People always talk about like Majora's Mask being a game that is very like weird and unsettling and interesting because it has the pressure of time. Like that to me is kind of like a horror game. So manga is really great for that because you can sort of see right in front of you and very visually this huge gamut of versions of ideas. And then when we sit down to work on games, we will basically just like reference books and be like, okay, let's read this like pitch line for this manga and see if that gets us close to the tone. If that sounds like the tone for the game we want to make. And we'll often do that and be like, oh yeah, yeah, like just as an example, this isn't real, but like the pitch for this new Junji Ito manga, who's Junji Ito is a very famous horror manga artist, and it's like, oh yeah, that sounds like we want. Like there's some cosmic horror and something that's really all about like the degradation of humanity, whatever. That sounds like the thing I want to make. Or something that's more lighthearted or comedic or whatnot. And we use those to say, like, oh, if you were to pitch me, like if Nancy was to pitch me this game using um, this pitch paragraph, what would I think about that? And if we go, oh yeah, that sounds great, then we go, okay, we kind of have an idea about what kind of game we think we want to make, or what kind of game that would be. So that's one very verbose way to explain how comics and manga help us make the games that we do.
And that's great to hear. And like I didn't consider it until you actually said it. But, outside of the mains, so there's like Image, Boom, Marvel, DC, what have you, and then the handful of smaller indie ones. Well, IDW I don't think is so much indie anymore, but there really isn't a lot in terms of comics in North America, Western at least, uh, in comparison to the way that Japan does it with manga, where there's several weekly series, several monthly series, and then you have, several different publications by several different companies, all of them ranging the gambit from, you know, uh, very generalistic children's stories, if I may put it that way as an easy sweep, all the way up to highly specific topics or genres or what have you. And some of them like even specialize, where you even have some authors, a name I cannot remember right now, who only produce the same story, so to say, or at least the same framing, so to say, every time. For example, the author I'm thinking of has been doing a baseball series.
Oh, Mitsuru Adachi.
Probably, but has been doing baseball series, like individual ones for I want to say 30 to near 40 years, almost like maybe even longer than I've been alive. And every time, it starts off with people wanting to go to Koshin.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
for
totally right. Yeah.
and for those that aren't aware, Koshin is a stadium for, I believe it's specifically, or at least colloquially, seen as a stadium that is used for effectively high school baseball tournaments, like
Yeah,
the.
Koshan is the high school is like the national high school tournament. It's actually going on
Thank
right
you.
now, and uh, or maybe it just finished, but like things are on right now, and it's like the biggest thing in the country.
Exactly, exactly. And like all of his stories start, at the beginning of a school year or what have you, and typically end with that. And for the last, like 30, 40 years, he has just been writing different variations of just that. And I think a few have been animated. My personal favorite was Cross Game,
Yeah,
but like even when you have those highly specific genres and specialized series or what have you, they're what I just said, it's a very broad stroke to say what it is, but for example, with cross game, that isn't so much about baseball as it is the relationship between um, effectively a surrogate child. And I say that just because he spends so much time with the family, and then one family and their way of processing and grieving loss, and a loss that happened, if I'm not mistaken, like 10 years prior to the main flesh and bone of the story. But it wasn't until you mentioned that the stark difference that I realized that that really is the case, and being able to pull from or being able to look and see what kind of little inspirations you can take from is a wild thing. And I don't think that's something that is as done in Western games as it would be in, say, like a Japanese RPG or what have you. For example, the entirety of From Software's borderline entire library is basically pulled from Berserk. Um,
right.
Admittedly so to a lot of it as well from the head of the Dark Souls, or a lot of the From guy or what have you for their not Armored Core series. But it's great to hear that. I know I'm off on a little bit of a rambling tangent. I'm going to try and pull it back, but it's great to hear that that's the way you kind of go about it, because I love the idea of seeing more um, non-standard Western tropes or non-standard Western topics being used to influence a Western product, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yep, totally.
And while we're on that topic, because you said you love it, and it sounds like you are very passionate about the genre, the umbrella term genre there. Uh, are there any manga that you'd like to recommend, especially since you've been reading a lot of it? Is there
Oh,
any that you'd like to recommend? Maybe like a small selection of different genres and your picks from
sure.
those genres.
Sure. So you mentioned Mitsuru Adachi's Cross Game, which is the only one of his series I think that's been officially translated as a manga into English. But as you said, he's been publishing sports series and baseball specific stuff since the 80s. And his first one is called Touch, which is basically like a national treasure of Japan. It's this, they have McDonald's campaigns that use the nostalgia for that manga and their anime to sell chicken burgers because that's how big of a deal it is. That just happened a couple months ago, I think. But anyway, so officially or not, you got to read the 80s manga Touch. It's the greatest thing of all time. There's another big mangaka whose name is Naoki Urasawa, who's like a legend, and he's made things like 20th Century Boys, Monster. I could go on, tons of series. He's got a book out right now called Asadora. It's I think there are two books, two volumes are out now in English, and the third one's coming soon. Um, and it's about this little girl who survives a sort of natural disaster just after World War II, and then she sort of grows up to become a pilot. And it's just essentially about her. And it's hard to explain because there are other things I don't want to ruin, but it's fantastic. And everything that guy touches is solid gold because he is so good. Like any book he makes, it's like 10 out of 10. So just if you have access to the library or bookstore, just pick up anything, you won't be disappointed. And like, oh god, I could go on and on, but manga because it's so good. Uh, one of the best things for, or one of the best series I've been reading lately, which is another old series because I prefer older stuff, um, is Rumiko Takahashi's Urusei Yatsura, which is from the 80s, or sorry, yeah, early 80s. People may know as the main character Lum, who's like the girl with the green hair and the tiger stripe bikini. There's an anime that did get released, I think, in English. And I've been actually reading all the recollected books of that lately because even though she's the creator of like Ranma One Half, Inuyasha, she's got a new series out now, and she's one of the most popular mangaka of all time, and one of the few who has managed to essentially cross like all genres, all major genres of mangaka, and kind of be like in the top three of all of them. But what's great about her is that her old stuff, like the Ursa Yatsura stuff, is comedic. And for me, it's like a lesson in how to draw comics because I get so hung up on certain things and I will pick up bad lessons or just sustain bad habits from my own drawing. And I just always pick up one of her books to go, okay, here's here's a great way to like draw something intelligently and simply, with just the amount of lines you need and exactly the expressions you need to kind of keep things moving. So she's like a complete master in that. So I could be here for 20 minutes just talking about manga recommendations. So I'll leave it at those three.
Well, thank you for those recommendations. And there is some I want to mention about Rumiko, and you kind of touched on it. And like her style is very much iconic, similar to the author of Touch. It's you see them and you instantly know, oh, okay, I know who's done this, even if you don't know the name. But one thing I want to touch on for Rumiko is you're spot on in that it's very it's straightforward, but and I don't know if this is just I don't know how much this holds up, but this is my opinion of it. But she has always done a very fantastic job at physical comedy in a drawn form. Like
Right.
everything is always incredibly expressive. Everything, is communicating exactly what you need to do. And I just wanted to mention that. There really isn't anything else I can say about, her work outside of, my opinion that, you know, outside of her being like around and iconic is that the her physical comedy style has always been something that I've enjoyed.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's a legend. She'd be one of those people if I got to meet, I would just pass out because she's so amazing.
Yes, yeah, you're right, absolutely a legend, and rightfully so, especially um you know uh, given that she is a woman author, has uh, came around at the time in manga where women were, well, not only women authors themselves being not as popular, but as well she wrote comics that had female leads at a time where female leads were, or sorry, not even female leads, where a female that was in any way, in any way, shape, or form in a quote unquote lead role would have been a supporting actress, or not actress, but a supporting role for like the
Right.
main character, whether it be like the sister, the mother, or the what have you, right? And from day one with I forget the original, the Mermaid series that
Oh
she's
yeah,
done.
Mermaid Saga is,
Thank you. That is the
which
name.
is a horror story, and that's just fantastic. I'm reading through that now. Or sorry, I
Uh,
read through that.
Yeah, and like I flipped through it before, and it's something I do want to get to. I didn't quite realize it was horror, so thank you for that. That will make it easier for me to pitch to my girlfriend, and also be able to read it easily, for both of us to enjoy, if you will. But you know, uh, it's great that she has continued to see large success with several animated series and whatnot. Despite, I shouldn't say despite. Um, but considering that a lot of her stuff came in the 80s when a female lead, a strong female lead at that, was not common or as received, well received,
Hmm.
but that's a whole other topic. I just wanted to add my 2 cents on that one before we move on, and I ask you some more about video games.
Let's do it.
So, Benjamin, I'm gonna go back a little, and like you said, you would have been in the '80s for this one. So, the selection might be a little smaller. So, when I say this, feel free to have a bit of range on it. But what was your favorite game as a child, and or in your youth, and why?
So, okay, I'm going to go on by eras here. My
Sure.
earliest favorite childhood game is the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game on Intellivision. You can't get it as that anymore because the license ran out like decades ago. So if you ever see it in a in television collection or whatnot, it's called Crown of Kings now. And for me, that was the first horror game that I ever played. And if you ever see it, or if people listening want to look it up on YouTube, essentially it has two phases. It's brilliant. It's essentially a roguelike where you start at the beginning, the like left edge of this map, and your goal is to get to this sort of like misty mountain on the other side. It's all very like prototypical sort of 70s style fantasy at that point. And you need to collect items such as a key to unlock a gate or perhaps a boat that lets you cross a river, whatnot. But you need to find the three pieces of the crown and reassemble them at the Misty Mountain and defeat the final evil dragon to win the game. But every time you load it up, it auto generates the map, and it changes the actual map design. And these little hills are generated, which can have I think one of three difficulty settings on them, like sort of easy, medium, hard. And the maps themselves within each of these hills, which are essentially like these little cavern systems, are also auto generated and random every single playthrough. So it is a game that you can play infinitely, which is amazing. But what makes it so special is once you go into a hill, you get this view where, again, if someone's looking up, you'll see essentially like a green screen, and the caves represented by sort of like a pale yellow series of hexagonal or octagonal rooms connected by these thin passageways. And you are like the little dude, archer, who's trying to go through. What it does, and again, it's still amazing for the time, which is probably like what 82, 83, but it uses sound to essentially telegraph what's going on. So I don't know how they generate the maps. Like I would love to get a postmortem on this, like how they figure out where enemies are going to be. But you essentially don't see a room until you enter it. So you're in this one area. You say it branches off four different ways. You choose the left way. As you're walking down the left passageway, it's sort of like filling it out, and then once you sort of get far enough, it then fills out the next room. But what makes it cool is you will hear sound cues such as bats, snakes, and in particular a dragon, and there are different kinds of dragons. And it is absolutely terrifying because I remember just being scared, witless, while going down a passageway, knowing I needed X, like whatever it was. There was an item I needed, I was looking for. Only have a couple of arrows left, and you start to hear that sort of like roar of a dragon, and it kind of sounds like a cat purring, but then it gets a little louder depending on how close you are to the passage. And then if you sort of just reveal the passage by stepping far enough into it, say the dragon appears and it makes just awful, terrifying sound and it goes right for you. And it is awesome. You're just running for your life. You're trying to get far enough away so it stops following you. Like it's got this entire sort of chase system. It's incredible. And a lot of what I wanted to do with, say, Worse Than Death, which is a horror game that uses sound and enemies that chase you and all that kind of stuff, essentially came from first playing this game back in the early 80s.
And everything you've said about that game has has me sold on it. If you pitch this game today, I I don't think anyone would bat an eye at the premise of it. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, with the current landscape, if you will, or the rise of roguelikes. I think, if that game were pitched today, most people would go, "Oh yeah, that sounds great." But back as far back as, in television, in, the '80s, that sounds like an absolutely wild premise. And you're right, everything that you said that it does, even down to the procedural generation, that sounds like a wonder to know that it existed back then.
Yeah, absolutely. It still amazes me what that game did and how simple it is and how wonderful it is. It sort of is something I go back to when I think about game design quite a bit.
Well, that's great to hear. And you said you were going to break it down by I forget the exact word you used, but chunks of age
Yeah,
or what have you.
yeah. So if I go to like NES era, I'm trying to think childhood favorite game. It's weird because there were games that I only ended up loving later, but that planted a seed in my brain when I was that age. And two of those were Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, and Metroid. I remember renting Metroid and just being completely confounded, not having any idea what I was doing, and not finding it terribly fun because I really was totally clueless. And then, of course, falling in love with sort of Metroid later on. But that was sort of the one where I was like, "There's something about this I love, but I don't know what that is yet because I'm kind of lost and confused." And similarly, Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest is one of those games where it actually influences the games we have made so far in silly little ways because I just love that game so much. A lot of people don't, but the way it sort of depicted this sort of the kind of mountainside and the backgrounds and just the night and day system. When I played that first, I was actually a little bit older, living in the country, like in a very tiny town, and something about that game just really, really spoke to me. So I'll stop there because otherwise I'll just list a bunch of games, which is cheating the question. But let's just say Metroid, Castlevania 2. Those aren't even the games I played the most. It's so funny. Those are like the games I didn't even play till later. But those are the ones that the correct answer is Super Mario Brothers 2, but still.
Well, that's very fair, and I wouldn't feel too bad about, wanting to break it down. I don't think it's really cheating the question because, the question is meant to be open-ended, and if the way you want to interpret it is by giving, a by genre or by era breakdown, I'm not going to be upset with that. However, if you want to leave it there, we can definitely move on.
Yeah, otherwise I'll just tell you like 20 favorite games over and over and over again.
Fair enough. So, what is it, Benjamin, that makes games enjoyable to you? Now, you kind of, I think you kind of danced around it, or have kind of been in the realm of answering that question implicitly, but explicitly, what is it about games that you enjoy? Like the games that you do enjoy, what makes them enjoyable?
Oh, that's a very good question because I actually think about this in the opposite terms. I think about all the things I don't like doing in games. Now that I'm like a middle-aged man and my time is precious, I tend to think about games that I want to play by going, what don't I want to spend my time doing? And then the list gets longer and longer as I get older. It's like I don't want to run around an open world and be bored for hours. Like I don't want to mess with skill trees. That's boring. Like I don't, it goes on and on and on. And my wife always laughs at me because she's like, "So what do you want to do in games?" The answer is like, I want to feel things and I want things to scare me. Those are the two major things. So basically, if any game has like a dating system or a horror element, I'm instantly interested because those are emotional connections. So I'm interested in games that provide emotional human-based connection. A lot of people like games because they like to, manipulate stats or play around with settings and, uh, you know, ship simulators, stuff like that, which I totally get. But that's just not how my brain works. My brain is all about like feelings, feelings and colors because I'm like just a total artist. So if a game sort of presents, for instance, if a game presents a trailer, it's like really beautiful, gorgeous art style, regardless of what the budget or art style is, and it's sort of aesthetically appealing to me, I'll be very excited. But then as soon as someone starts mentioning like, oh, you're going to level up things, or you're going to manage something, or someone mentions the word crafting or resources, then I instantly tune out. But if someone just slips in a line about like make time for your friends, like go on dates, increase relationship stats, then I'm like, oh, excuse me, I'm very interested in this. So the games I generally want to play are the ones that have a story to tell me. Like they have something they want to say, and they don't want to spend generally 90 hours doing it. They have something to say, and if that's over a weekend, that sounds even better. Like that's what I would prefer. So that thing that they might want to say will be like in the example of Old Man's Journey, one of my favorite games from the past few years, which is like a 45-minute game that left me crying at the end because it was so tragic and wonderful. Uh, that game has a very very simple set of mechanics but a very nice art style, beautiful look to it, intelligently designed. And what you do is so simple, but is engaging enough because your the sort of carrot on the stick for you as a player is, well, I'm invested in who this old man is, and I want to find out where he's going and why, because it sounds like he's on a mission and is important. And the goal of the game essentially is reveal the story to figure out what's going on, and which all leads up to this amazing payoff at the end. And most games are don't really do that so much anymore. Most games have a lot of competing elements, and this is a thing that gets talked about in design talks all the time, where essentially you have like multiple sort of bosses of this particular game, where one major element is like a progression system, one element is maybe a monetization system, one element is a connection to multiplayer, one element is this other stuff, and all these things are competing for your time within the game itself, and quite literally competing for your time, where you don't even know what to do because you have all these things sort of pushing you forward or pulling at you. So I tend to look for games that have one thing to say. To say like, I want you to, you know, walk through this spooky forest and try not to pee your pants with all the spooky stuff that's going to happen. And we're going to tell you a creepy story along the way. That sounds great. But as soon as it has all these bullet points and all these other checklists, that's when I tend to go, oh, I can't do it. My brain, it's too old. I don't have time for this.
You know, I can definitely appreciate the sentiment that you basically, explained or wrapped around there. Because yeah, that is a very a poignant thing to have because as you get older, your time gets more valuable, and you wanna kind of focus it right now. I'm just going to make this one comment before going on because I want to carry on, or I want to get on to the next part of what I want to say to you. Um, but that is a very, very weird set of Venn diagrams. Horror with dating sim. That's I just want to point that out there, and it leads perfectly into this. Um, have you played the Dread X Collection 2?
No, I have not.
There, there is a well. I'll explain this first. I'll give you the premise. It'll make far more sense. I promise. So the Dread X collections, it's done by Dread XP or the publisher or what have you. It is a bunch of horror or suspense thriller kind of games, and they're all little mini or micro games. Some of them range, I think, as short as 15-20 minutes. Some of them can last a couple of hours, and they're relatively inexpensive. I think $10 each, or up to $10 each Canadian. Want to put that asterisk on there since we are Canadian. Um, but in DreadX Collection 2 especially, there is a mini game where the entire purpose is dating I believe it was Cthulhu, but it's dating a female representing Cthulhu, and it's trying to woo her over as she encourages you to complete um the ritual to end the world effectively. Um, so if
Sounds
since,
great.
since and it is relatively short in terms of visual novel, dating sim, what have you. But um, since you were a fan of horror, I would recommend you take a look at the Dread XP games. So Dread X Collection, Collection 2. There's a few others that I'm just not remembering the name, but I think there's a Dread X Collection 3 as well. But there's a handful of them, and they're also
Cool.
producing more games. But Dread X Collection 2 especially, if only because it has what I think you are perfectly in the center of the Venn diagram of the one mini game.
Nice. Sounds great.
Uh,
I appreciate
um,
that.
yeah, no, you're very welcome. I I'm not going to lie. When I've pitched DreadX Collection to people before, I have never had the opportunity to pitch that specific game as one that I think would be square in the center of what they wanted. That one is more of a thing I would throw out there. Oh yeah, you can also do this, and it's amusing, and people laugh at it because it's just the concept's amusing. However, I just thank you for giving me the opportunity to pin you directly in the middle of both of those Venn diagram circles, or but the
Nice.
circles on that diagram.
Perfect. Perfect. Sounds like the game exactly tuned to my interests.
I fingers crossed that it is something that you'll look into and enjoy, and not enjoy because I don't like the idea of giving bad suggestions to people. So Benjamin, I don't want to take up much more of your time. However, I do have one more question for you. And it's kind of vague, and I apologize, it's vague because I struggle to explain it. So by all means, if it doesn't make sense to you, let me know and I'll take a better swing at it. But is there a game that you have that you would consider like your best comfort game? And I mean that in the sense of a game that if you were to walk away tonight and, throw it up on the Nintendo or on the PlayStation or what have you, and you started it up, is there a game that you have that would make you immediately remember the feelings that you had when you first played it? Like that enjoyment, that awe, what have you? Like, is there a game that does that for you? And if there is, do you mind talking about it a little or sharing that with me or us?
Oh yeah, I have several that are sort of my absolute comfort food games. I think I tweeted about this like a month and a half ago of like four games that I can play anytime and just feel great about. So if it's okay with you, I'll mention all four.
Yeah, go for it.
So number one is Super Mario Brothers 2, which is my favorite Mario game. That's just my favorite comfort food game. It's like to speed run it just whenever, like just try to blaze through it in 30 minutes or something like that, or 20. I think I got it down to 17 or 20. I can't remember. Um, that's a game that I love, and I've played so many times. And there's a huge sort of multiple reasons why I love it. Some nostalgia, some sort of like family ties and whatnot. The second one is well, this is tough, but I would say it's tough between one and two. But I'm gonna say the original Mortal Kombat is one of my favorite comfort food games. I could play that game every single day of my life and never never get tired of it. I like MK1 and 2 nearly equally, but there's something about the first one with its um, sort of like 80 or sorry, it's like pseudo 60s Shaw Brothers aesthetic that I really find quite endearing. And I'm one of those lunatics who has like a rare Sega CD console just so I can play Sega CD Mortal Kombat on it, essentially. And that's the thing that I can duck into anytime I want. The next one is Street Fighter 2, but specifically, I've come to love the Genesis version of Street Fighter 2. It's my favorite one, Street Fighter 2 Special Championship Edition. That's a comfort food game because I play again. If Nancy, my wife, sees me playing that, she's like, "Really, you're playing Street Fighter 2 again?" I've probably bought a version of Street Fighter 2 like 25 times in my life. Some variation on one console or another. And specifically the sort of Turbo or Special Championship Edition, that to me is peak Street Fighter. And that's another thing where uh, if I just get that hankering, I put that game in, and I can just play that. Everything's great. And it's tough to pick for the fourth one because I don't remember what I tweeted, but I'm just gonna say Super Castlevania 4, because that is a game that I love so much, just by only beating it maybe twice, maybe if that, um, because of the music, and I have all these memories of playing it as like a rental on my birthday, and then eventually getting my own Super NES and trying to get a copy and all that kind of stuff. But that is one of those comfort food games where as soon as I put it on, I'm like, oh, this game is to me is like perfect. I just love everything about it. And if someone was like, hey, do you want to play Super Castlevania 4? There is not a single moment in my entire life, unless I had to like run into an operating room or something, that I would say, no, absolutely not. So that's why that is one of my comfort food games.
And thank you so much for sharing those. And there's something I wanna quickly comment on, uh, because I've experienced it numerous times. Um, but it's what you said is Nancy will see you playing Street Fighter 2 and have the expression of really um, I I absolutely love you for sharing that, uh, and I love the idea of that because for me, it's I my girlfriend says that to me, but it's usually when she sees me playing games that she doesn't understand. Um,
Right.
like she can't functionally understand the concept of or why I'm still doing it. For example, I forget the name of it right now, and I really upset about that. But it's a game where you are effectively on a pseudo um, Windows screen or what have you, and you're navigating the screen, and like your inventory is a window pop up, and your all your things are separate window pop-ups, and you're playing effectively a roguelike RPG.
I know the game you're talking about, and I also can't remember the name.
And it really bothers me because I've sunk so many hours into it, and I love that it's um, a shared experience that people can have where they have like their significant other or what have you look at you and be like, really, that again? Whether it's because they just are tired of seeing you play it, or that they don't understand why you enjoy it so much. But thank you for sharing, all four of those games, but that one especially spoke to me because um it's something that I've experienced numerous times, and it's always fun to watch the other person have to be like, "Really? Again? You still?"
Yep. It's like when my wife sees me watching the 1989 Batman movie for the 50th time. It's like every version that comes out, I'll buy it because I'm going to keep watching it till the day I die. Or The Shining.
There is much to say about Tim Burton's Batman. The thing that always sticks out to me is one, the fact that the suit doesn't have nipples, um,
Yeah.
but also the scene where Batman just kicks a grenade back into the whatever with someone. Um,
Oh, that's it. Yeah, that's in Batman Returns.
oh,
He
sorry,
he,
that's the
he
sequel.
kills one of the Penguin's henchmen. Just like doesn't give a.
Um, so yeah, my mistake there, but it's still a Tim Burton one. So I can share your love of the Tim Burton Batman movies, if only because of how unique they were in their approach. Um, Whether or not that unique today would be considered, um, or that statement would be actually considered unique or not, seeing as Batman has undergone so many different things with what have you and such. But anyway, now, Benjamin, like I said, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but if you'll permit me, if you have a few more minutes, there's just something I wanted to ask about, and it's something you tweeted about just before we started. Is
Yep.
that good?
Of course.
Awesome. So, as someone that doesn't seem to talk to a lot of people that actively mention ActRaiser or seem excited about the premise of ActRaiser, because it's a very cult classic kind of game where it was half dungeon, side scroll dungeon, what have you, and half city builder or sim. Um, are you excited to know that just, an hour before we started recording, a remaster of that first game was announced?
Oh, absolutely. And like what a random surprise. I was on the couch watching the direct with Nancy, and she was laughing at me because I was just like on my feet, like, what? ActRaiser? I saw the whatever the first couple frames of that teaser, and I knew what it was, and went, "Are you kidding me?" It's one of those games you assume no one would ever do anything with again because it's just that good and unique. And to see that there's a remaster with more music and remastered stuff being done by Yuzo Koshiro's, the original composers, just incredible. Yeah, I played that game first around launch time on Super NES because it was such an early title, and that was one of the games that just sort of made the system seem like this mind-blowing new piece of technology, especially with the soundtrack. And it's just something that it's been completely forgotten over the years, but it's one of those games where, much like with a lot of indie games that come out today, combines two things. I mean, like horror and dating sims, this combines side-scrolling sword action with town builder. Like, what? And then there's this whole sort of like pseudo religious theme to it. It's very bizarre, but I'm so glad that's come back.
Yeah, exactly. And I thank you for sharing how you reacted to it, because that was a very similar thing to me. Like when it popped up with like the beginning teaser part, I immediately went, "Oh, ActRaiser," in utter confusion. Not because, I was disappointed in that, but just I think similar to you in that, ActRaiser, like really? Like that's what they're doing? And, my girlfriend sitting next to me had the reaction of, not understanding at all. And, in that brief, like 3 seconds before it bounced into it, I had to immediately try and explain, oh, no, it's a cult classic, all this stuff. And then as everything's happening on the screen, to her utter confusion, because, it's, the way they're presenting it, having to explain, okay, well, it's how it all works and how everything is with it. But I'm thankful that you tweeted that, just because it's rare that I speak to anyone that actively talks about ActRaiser. And like I said, I know it's a cult classic. I know there's probably hundreds of thousands of people that have played it or remember it fondly. But like I said, it's one of those series that's just long forgotten, and it's rare that you get a chance to even comment that it exists, if that makes any sense. So thank you.
Mhm. Yep, absolutely.
Now, Benjamin, as I've said a few times now, I don't want to take up any more of your time. However, if there was anything else you want to discuss, a cool game, what you're doing, something you feel more people should be aware of, the floor is yours. As well, please let everyone know where they can find more information about you, which I will also be including in the episode description, of course.
Sure. Well, I can't tell you what we're working on game wise, but we of course have a couple things going on. One thing we won't be talking about for quite a while, and something else I hope we'll be talking about very soon. Um, but in other regards, as we mentioned before, I've been working on the official comic book sequel to Worse Than Death, and that's kind of been my evening and weekends baby as I work through that. So I actually launched the first volume. It's a 72-page book that got launched at TCAP, the Toronto Comics Arts Festival, this past spring. Originally as an sort of exclusive there, and then people just kept asking about it, and stores seemed to like it. So I've been recently speaking to retailers and in other cities, and been shipping out copies to um, like those shops, comic shops in UK. It's going to be one in the States and a few more in Canada. So hopefully that'll see a wider release very soon. We'll get that into other shops. But if anyone's curious about checking out the game Worse Than Death or other games, or of course the comic book, easiest way you can do is go to my link tree. It's got everything, including the BancyCo website, linked from there. And you can just go to linktree.com/Benjamin Rivers.
Awesome, and thank you so much to share that. And now I do apologize. I didn't really spend a lot of time talking about your games, and that's on me. However, I did want to say, I'm happy to hear that you're still working on things and that there's something that you have in the works that you are able to share coming up. Because around the boom or the beginning of the boom for indie games on Steam and such, but I did play Home when it first came out, and it intrigued me and I did enjoy it. So I do look forward to getting the time to try some of your other games as well as whatever else you do release, especially because from what I've seen, they always do have a nice pixel graphic style and what have you. So I'm looking forward to that. Especially though the comic. Now that you've said that it's you're starting to send it out and be available elsewhere. I'm gonna have to keep my eye out for that just because I've liked what I've seen of your work, and I always like having easy ways to support creators, especially Canadian creators, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if I'm being honest, the Worse Than Death comic is precisely what I said before that I loved. It is a dating system and a horror story in one manga. So I'm bringing those two things together.
Awesome. That makes it even easier. I've mentioned this before, but that makes it an even easier to sell for some people. So thank you for giving me that extra little bit of tidbit to when I mention it to people.
Yeah, thanks for letting me talk your ear off about old and television games and horror stuff.
Oh no, no, really, the pleasure is all mine. I thank you so much for making the time with me and letting me ask you some questions and uh, answering them, and it was very fun, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
And thanks again to our guest Benjamin for making time to have this conversation with me, and thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast. And a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Road Steep. And if you like this podcast and want to support it and help it grow, please subscribe or follow me on Twitter at Red Tunic Podcast to receive the latest episodes and news, and be sure to share it with those you might or think you might also enjoy it. Thanks, and until next time.